Hello and welcome to the fifth DM's Book Club.
I think it's fifth. Yeah, I think it's fifth.
I can't remember anymore. The days and weeks go into one. So I don't remember when we talk. It's a podcast where we read some Dungeons and Dragons and discuss how we might include it in our role-playing games. My name is Fiona, and with me, as ever, the other half is Ryan.
Hi, hello,
Ryan. How
other
are you?
half.
I know.
I'm fine. Yes, lovely. How are you?
I am great. Shall I tell the podcast what I suddenly found this week?
Go for it.
So, you know Baldur's Gate 3?
You told me about this. I still haven't seen the trailer.
So in our D&D group or whatever, there's a talk about the Baldur's game being released soon or something. So I checked it out on Steam because someone said, it was not on Steam. I thought, there is a pre-order. Yeah. And the first cinematic trailer not only contains a mind flayer. I knew mind flayers were involved. There are GIF on dragons. There's a bloody nautiloid. And it looks incredible.
Can you buy a Fiona for mode where the nautiloid is sort of crossed out and censored?
And I can't believe I'm saying this. The nautiloid actually looks pretty cool.
Oh,
I know.
You slated it royally. I can't believe you'd say that.
In my head, it looks stupid. I think the graphics just make it look incredible. So I would recommend it. It's the first cinematic trailer. It's basically, I think it's the first 5 minutes of the game, whatever. It's everything we've talked about. So if you've been catching up with this podcast, I feel really relevant right now. I don't know about you, Ryan.
We feel incredible. I always feel relevant. I'll be honest. I have a emblazoned confidence that shines for everything I do. Maybe.
Ryan, you've picked today's topic.
I have.
What are we talking about?
It's almost like I was thinking about what could I talk about in Dungeons and Dragons and came across a huge brick wall and slammed my head against the first thing I saw, which was the very title of Dungeons and Dragons. Today we will be talking about dragons, specifically the Monster Manual. We're going retro. None of these Volo guides or Mordekainen's tones or anything like this. Proper Monster Manual.
Yeah, original 3, yeah.
Exactly. Now, if you know anything about the Monster Manual, there are 3 things in the Monster Manual that gave special attention. I mean, everything else gets its own little bit, right? Mm-hmm. You've got a page or half a page on every single monster here. Some monsters get a page and a half if there's a particularly good picture. There's a great one of a Yeti, for instance, somewhere in the book. But demons, devils, and dragons all get special attention because all 3 of those categories are particularly interesting. And we've spoken about devils and demons and the blood war and all that sort of stuff. Dragons are the other one you need to know about, because if you're going to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons, the dragons are going to have to pop up at some point, and they are incredibly fun to try and work with because there are all kinds of dragons with all kinds of mindsets and styles and ways they go about things, and some pretty distinct differences between the 2 different main categories of dragons you should probably know about, which some people do, some people don't. It depends if you're new to D&D or not, I guess.
Or if you're me. I did not know the difference. So as I follow stuff like Critical Role and High Rollers, they often drop in a dragon and sort of mention the colour, and I go, are all dragons bad? But prove me wrong. So Ryan, what's the difference? Well, what are the main? Just give me a summary of dragons, plural. Let's try that.
The first thing you need to know about dragons is that they are not immortal, but they are the closest thing to immortal you are going to get in D&D without being immortal, right? A dragon has no real sense of age in the sense of it growing old and dying. It's more of a state of how much dragon you've got. They hatch from an egg. They start very, very small, little wormlings. They get bigger as they get older. And eventually they get so big, they become what they call ancient, where they are these huge, massive dragons. And then they become real problems, depending on which side of the fence you sit on. Dragons are intelligent. They are cunning. They are wise. Most of them, to be fair, with a couple of exceptions. They are generally very high-functioning creatures. They are incredibly powerful. And they have 2 gods, whereas a lot of sort of things in D&D have 1 god. Dragons have 2, and they are very, very different. You have Tiamat, who is the 5-headed demon dragon that resides in hell, literally in the first layer of Avernus, and has a particular thing with Asmodeus where they hate each other. I think we may have mentioned this briefly in the Blood War, but in the first layer of hell, you've got Tiamat. She is evil, okay? She has 5 huge heads, of which there is one of every color of dragon that she represents, and they are all what they call chromatic dragons. Chromatic dragons essentially are dragons that have just a color, they're matte. It's like Bob Ross picks up a paintbrush and goes to town, right? If he's got that color on his little board and it's stuck in his afro, it's probably a chromatic dragon and it's probably evil, right? That's the way to remember it. If Bob Ross has got it, chances are it's evil.
I need a Bob Ross minor character now in our D&D sessions. Just there going, dragons.
Oh, that's great. That's just wonderful. Oh,
trees.
He's so
trees.
Anyway, on the other side of the fence, you have, and I've just totally forgotten his name. Is it Bahamut? I think it's it is Bahamut.
Yeah,
we just have a total mind fart. I've been reading about this.
Wait, is it? Oh, hang on. Is it Bahamut? I think
Bahamut.
Yeah.
This is the pronunciation.
Yeah.
That's all fun. You know what? I'm just going to have a look at this. The King of Dragons, the Platinum Dragons, Bahamut. Yes, I was close enough. Look, I think I was just about right. The
close.
Platinum Dragon, as otherwise he's known. He is a huge silver dragon that dwells on Mount Celestia, which is a good plane. We've talked a lot about evil planes. We haven't really talked about good planes of D&D. But Mount Celestia is one of the outer planes of pure good. And Bahamut lives on that. And he represents what they call the metallic dragons. So dragons that have a shiny complexion. Imagine if some real posh twat with a lot of money had a car and they wanted a really shiny paint. Chances are it's a good dragon. You've got all kinds of metals. If you traded with it with currency, it's a good dragon. And dragons don't really come in between. I mean, there are lots of different traits that bind dragons. They have a huge sense of greed and curiosity, of a sense of territory and pride, a sense of ego and self-confidence. There's a lot of things that run through dragons generally, but they do sit into evil and good camps. And they're very, very different. And you're saying you come across a dragon in a campaign, you have a look at the color, you're going to know pretty quickly whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing.
See, for me, I would just assume that, like you kind of made it obvious, like dragons are not to be messed with. Like for me, whenever I think dragon, obviously, like my first experience with a dragon wasn't D&D. Obviously, it was like The Hobbit, and if you've seen the recent film, which I'm sure everyone has, obviously you have Bilbo and that sort of incredible scene of this horde of jewels and gems, and you just see Smaug sort of appearing around the corner. So these things are huge. Again, that size thing really screws with me. But also, like, this thing has a choice whether to eat you or not, unless you can prove yourself to be worth its time. So ultimately, I don't think you can bargain with a dragon, because you will never have the upper hand unless you are incredibly lucky. And even then, it is so slight, because they like you said, they are smart, they are powerful, they have breath weapons, which are scary. And
yes.
They are an incredible monster creature. It's just one of those things. Like, it is the staple of Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, well, at some point you should face a dragon, because I assume at one point or another that would be the final boss, is to face a dragon of some sort.
Yeah, exactly. And they do make very good final bosses, or things that rule particular areas, or they pose threats to kingdoms and entire sort of, I wouldn't say go so far as to say planes. They make very good sort of big villains, and the breath weapon is the big thing. That's one thing that binds dragons together. Once they get, in fact, all dragons have a breath weapon, but once they get beyond the young age, they also start to get things called legendary actions, which make them particularly difficult to deal with. They can bite, they can slash, they can tail whip, they can use their wings, they can breath weapon. And the breath weapon changes depending on what the type of dragon you've got. Some shoot fire, some shoot lightning, some shoot cold. You've got acid in there, you've got poison. There's one to essentially cook any pizza you want to cook, really. There's a lot of different types. And you were saying about bribing them and dealing with them. Mm-hmm. Well, again, it depends on what dragon you face, because they are all very different. I think, should we start with metallic dragons? Because I think they're quite fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Metallic dragons, do you remember? Good or bad?
They are good, because I have it down in my notes in front of me.
Very good. Very good. So the metallic dragons are the good dragons. And there is one unifying trait, apart from being good, that metallic dragons possess that chromatic dragons do not. And that is the ability to shapeshift into beasts and humanoids. Now, this is something that runs through all the different types of metallics. You've got brass, you've got bronze, you've got copper, you've got gold, and you've got silver. Brass and bronze, to me, I always get tripped up over that because they are different. But really, it's like all the metals, they go for something that are like super similar to each other. But they are all bound by the fact that they are able to shapeshift into humanoids once they get into a certain age. It is very common for a dragon of a good alignment to transform themselves into a human, an elf, a halfling, an old man, a peasant, a farmer, or anything like that, and then actually wander around. They even become horses, elks, dogs, all kinds of things. There have been tales of dragons joining the society in all kinds of places and essentially just watching and enjoying. I mean, they all have different traits. The gold dragon, for instance, is incredibly very solitary. They don't like people very much. They keep to themselves, but they are incredibly wise and powerful, and they will pursue evil religiously, and they will help anyone that is deemed in their eyes to be doing the cause of good. You know, these dragons are, you come across a dragon of this nature, it's not necessarily a bad thing. They are incredibly good creatures. It doesn't stop them being dragons, though. And this is kind of what I think you were hinting at before. Dragons are all possessed with a sense of self-worth. And they believe that they are very, very important. And good dragons still have that trait. You know, they are very confident in themselves. They very believe that they are put on this plane of existence for the cause of being good and world shaking and changing everything. And, you know, things belong to them if the greater good possesses them to be a reason. So a dragon will easily take some treasure from another good aligned person if it believes that it needs to look after it for the overall cause. And there's no arguing with a dragon if it does that.
Definitely.
Also, other dragons like silver dragons, they're other ones that often come across in campaigns. Silver dragons they shoot cold instead of fire, which is what gold dragons shoot. But silver dragons really do like to get involved with human life, and especially things that have very short lifespans. They fascinate them. The sort of vigor and charm of short-lived creatures that they have to get loads done before they effectively die. So they're fascinated by that. A silver dragon will happily deal with themselves in society, and they will look around and make friends and then get distracted and go back and deal with its own treasure hoard and forget what it was doing and come back and realize 30 years have passed and the people it knew were dead. But, you know, it's fine. It just makes friends with their children.
Yeah. I thought that was really, really sweet. Like, you just always have like what I would term as like a fun uncle or a crazy aunt. It's like, oh yeah, that dragon. Oh, it's always been in the family for generations. So I quite like that. But the other thing that is a big difference from chromatic dragons is that metallic dragons have 2 breath weapons, not just one. And I did not know that. I find that fascinating.
They do. And it all stems on this sort of point that they are not natural. Well, they are natural born killers, but they don't exist to kill. They exist to do what they need to do for whatever their purpose is. And they all have that sort of, I guess, like the safety trigger mode. It makes up for it. Generally speaking, chromatic dragons have stronger breath weapons than metallic dragons, and generally they're just a little bit tougher. But metallic dragons generally make up for that with intelligence and, as you say, more flexibility in how they sort of go about their business. The other thing that stands metallic dragons apart is the sense of smell and the memory of smell that comes with it. They are fantastic at remembering things, and they are fantastic at remembering things with a immortal aspect to it as well. So there's a great example in this book of a dragon will come down and will find that somebody has stolen something from its treasure hoard, and it will remember the smell of that thief. And 200 years later, it will encounter a human clan, which it's helping, and it's doing the cause of good, and it's fighting with it. And the leader of that clan will be a descendant of the person who stole the treasure and will have nothing to do with it and will be utterly good, but the dragon will not trust them and will have a really negative opinion, because to a dragon it's the same smell, it's the same scent, and the years have not eroded its memory. They're very long-lived in that sense. It's very interesting.
It's pretty cool that it feels, again, very Doctor Who, where like you can trace them by the bloodline. Like I thought that was really cool. So what about chromatic dragons then? What is their key? What's the summary? What's the scoop on them?
Where metallic dragons seek information, treasure, power out in order to sate curiosity, or to help beat back evil, or to fulfill some sort of greater purpose. They do like treasure as well, don't get me wrong. They will have a lot of treasure. Chromatic dragons exist for pure greed, ego, selfishness, hunger. They are much more primal, they are much more aggressive, and they are much more evil. They genuinely are evil creatures that are put onto this plane because they believe that they should rule and they are in charge for a purpose, and anything they come across is insignificant to a dragon. Trying to bargain with a chromatic dragon is a different kettle of fish. You come across a metallic dragon, you have to be clever. You have to give it something of value to dragons believe in fair exchange. But if you come across a chromatic dragon, you have to convince it not to kill you. That's the big difference. And each dragon has its own weak point. Chromatic dragons, generally, they have matte scales. So you have black, white, red, blue, and green, all with different breath weapons. The same sort of things. I mean, all the different dragons, they have all kinds of fun ones. I mean, you get some dragons that can live underwater, some dragons that can burrow underground, some that can climb to walls. There's a particular horror for any nightmare you wish to create, really. They are all kinds of things. But chromatic dragons really do love to make lairs in unforgiving and inhospitable places, and they love to build treasure hoards of gold, gems, creatures, food, even treasures of memory to an extent, but they are much more primal in instinct. They're evil sods, these ones.
So which would you say, if you could pick your favorite out of the metallic and chromatic dragons? Do you have like a one that you're like, that would be cool, I like that dragon? I guess.
You see, I've always liked the metallic dragons because I always like the idea of something incredibly powerful that can be a force for good. Mm-hmm. I think putting that into a campaign is really interesting. You're sort of like, well, if your party of level 10 adventurers are trying to do something and they come across an ancient gold dragon who agrees to help them, that puts a different scope on a story. It's not just like, here is a big villain. It's something very clever and old that you get to play with the mindset of some sort of bigger plan. I enjoy that a lot, and I love the shape shifting. Mm-hmm. I think that's really clever. Mm-hmm. You know, for dragons to have a sense that they actually enjoy fitting in with sort of humankind, and they love to sort of get involved. And yeah, like the brass dragons, for instance, are
yes.
absolutely love to chat and talk, and will pin, again, great story in the book of literally a brass dragon pinning someone down that tries to escape in order to engage in chit chat.
I wrote down as the brass dragons, ones at a party you can't get away from. So
they are the party and it follows you home. Yeah, exactly. So I prefer that. Chromatic dragons are really good fun, and I would encourage you to put a dragon in your campaign at some point. And certainly they are easier to put in a campaign because they're evil. You can use them as put one in the dungeon and you've got an evil thing that is Dungeons and Dragons. So players will love that. They really do.
For me, the one that stood out was the blue dragons, because they are, because obviously, again, I think, blue, that's going to be water, it's coast. No, that is lightning and the desert, and they bury themselves up to their snouts, so just their sort of horn on their nose is peering out. And so the caravans will go past it and it will just erupt from the sands and take stuff. And I thought, that's awesome. For me, that is like a cool encounter you could do.
Yeah.
That you've heard that there is a dragon nearby, you have to be super careful, and then suddenly it appears, and you're in a big open space full of difficult terrain because sand is not easy to walk or run on. I was like, oh, that I just all about blue dragons. I was like, I don't know. We've come across this before when I've gone, devils, usually fire, but you've got ice devils, whoa! And so I'm now like, dragons in the desert, like the blue dragons really stood out for me. And this is going to sound such a bad, but I did not realize there's a difference between poison and acid until I read.
Really?
Yeah, so obviously you have the black dragons for acid and then the green dragons for poison. And I was like, is that not the same thing? Have they just doubled up?
You know what? They are very similar just in stats as well. They both sort of can breathe underwater. They both live in either swamps or forests. There's a lot of similarity there. Yeah. No, blue dragon. It's funny. It's like reading a tarot card or something like that. It's like, which dragon do you? Oh, one of those Facebook quizzes from years ago. Which house are you in Harry Potter? Which dragon are you? So you've picked the one where its particular evil qualities are a sense of vanity and a sense of superiority. It's interesting that.
Yeah. What are you talking about?
Blue dragons are really one of those dragons that you can barter your way out of by essentially flattering them and making them feel like they are the best things in the world. They talk about having minions and creatures that follow them and basically just suck up to them and provide some sort of service. Whereas if you come across a white dragon, for instance, they are essentially the idiot dragons and they live to freeze people and then eat them. That's kind of it. They're very good hunters. They're very animalistic, but So dragons are really fun. But whether you come across a chromatic or a metallic, it is a very different story.
Did you know there is a third kind of dragon, Ryan?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about, Fiona.
So, as of November last year, it was the 45th anniversary of Wizards of the Coast, which is Sapphire. Ooh, well, it took me a moment then. Sapphire. In older editions, there were things called gem dragons. And so they've released the stats for a sapphire dragon, and they've made hints for a campaign or a adventure coming out, I think, at the end of this year, so 2020, which will involve or sort of bring back gem dragons, which I thought was absolutely fascinating because I hadn't heard of them. So like you said, chromatics are, the evil sort of dragons, are chaotic evil stuff, and then you've got the good line dragons as the metallics, and then gem dragons are just in the middle.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, cool. And just like, again, so the Sapphire one, so they just like collecting magical weapons and armor, and they're in the cave and stuff, and they eat spiders. That's what I got from that.
That's really good. That's good. Hey, no, that's really interesting. That takes me back to a very old edition of D&D. Yeah. That's really, really cool.
And then sort of, was it their sort of leader is a ruby dragon called, now I'm going to get this wrong, Sardior, who has a flying like castle with 5 ancient gem dragons surrounding them. So a bit like Bahamut with his golden dragons as well. So I was just like, what? There's more dragons. So I was like, that's cool.
It's there. People love playing around with dragons. For the campaign I run, it's not official Wizards of the Coast material. It's what do they call it? The Kobold Press, who are very famous sort of third party that do a lot of D&D stuff, and I use some of the books they put out, and there are all kinds of extra dragons in there, from astral dragons to something we've got in our campaign, which is a wind dragon, which is, again, one of these sort of neutral creatures. So yeah, I love the different types of them. We're dealing with sort of two. I mean, even in this book, there is actually 2 more types of dragon. You've got Dracoliches, which are when dragons forsake their mortal bonds and become undead, which is horrifying. And then shadow dragons, which I find really, really cool, which is when a dragon spends a little bit too much time in the Shadowfell. As a lovely and endearing place the Shadowfell is.
And that, again, that's sort of that brings me back to sort of like Yu-Gi-Oh, like, it's like blue eyes white dragon but in the death zone or whatever, so you just get so yeah, like dragon liches. I thought that's terrifying, because not only do you have a dragon, but then you have a whole, for a dragon to become a lich there has to be a whole process, you have to have a cult around it, and it's just frightening. And the idea of the process being like the soul of the dragon is transferred into a gem, and then it becomes, but then obviously if the dragon dies it goes back into the gem until it finds another dragon. And so I didn't like that. The other kind of dragon I saw, which technically isn't a dragon, it's the dragon turtle, which is the last on the last page of it. But I thought that was quite cool, because it's like it's obviously just a massive turtle. The picture of it's really cool, but it has something called steam breath, which I was like, whoa, that's terrifying. It's like, you're like, is it going to blow water at me? No, you're just going to boil to death.
Yeah. But this actually, it brings me to the thing, that everything has a breath weapon if it's a dragon. And using a dragon in a campaign is an interesting one to get your head around, because they are, I forget who did them, but there's a really famous set of books in D&D called The Monsters Know What They're Doing. And I think there's maybe even a blog based on it as well. Or maybe the book was based on the blog. I'm not entirely sure who wrote it. Accreditation needed, I'm sure. But these sort of entries and stories always went through monsters and then gave DMs a really good example of how they thought. Putting a creature from a stat block in a monster manual, you only get so far. If you have a campaign of fighters with full plate and you smash a monster against them, it's never going to get very far. You have to play to their strengths, and dragons have a particular way of fighting you always need to keep in mind. Dragons all can fly, and unless they want to get up close, which is very rare, unless they think that they are 100% going to win, they will fly. They will stay away from groups. And you should always remember to use that flight. Specifically, you should have a look at how far the breath weapon of a dragon takes, or how far the range of that breath weapon is. If it's 60 feet, chances are the dragon will be hovering at about 55 to 60 feet. If it's 90, chances are it'll be 85 to 90 feet. They will hover and they will pepper a party quite specifically with breath weapons all day long as they can get away with it. Mm-hmm. They all have legendary resistances. So, no suggestion saying fly away for 3 minutes or polymorphs. It's going to be very difficult. The saving throws on these things, absolutely crazy. I mean, I'm looking at an ancient black dragon, for instance. They've got Dex +9, Strength +8, Con +14, Wiz +9, Charisma +11. So the saving throws there are absolutely mental. And then 3 legendary resistances. They all have legendary actions as well. Always remember to use them. Very, very difficult to remember that. I don't know how, as a DM, just write it on the top of the sheet, just like use it. At the end of every turn. They can make tail attacks if they've been sort of put close. They can detect to try and find hidden people. And the perception on these creatures is through the roof. I mean, again, I'm looking at this ancient black dragon. I think the passive perception is 26. They are very perceptive. They're gonna spot you. They've got blind sight. Remember that. You can't sneak up on a dragon with invisibility. They can still see you exactly where you are as long as you're touching the ground. Actually, no, blind sight's not even tremor sense, is it? No, they just know where you are.
You just know. They've got a feeling you're there.
They've got a good feeling. And as part of the legendary actions, they can do something called a wing attack as well, which is effectively a melee attack that causes them to move another half of its movement effectively. So remember, they can fly, they can move in turns. It's not uncommon for a dragon to fly, pepper with breath weapons, and then fly really high so they can't be hit. Wait until the breath weapon recharges, and then fly back down and do it again and again and again. And a dragon will not want to be captured as well. They do not want to fight to the death. They are very, very egotistical. Unless you are fighting them in their lair, they will probably fly away if they get injured. And they will keep a perfect memory of exactly who attacked them, and they will plague them, and they will not rest until they're dead. But they are patient. That's the thing. Always remember that.
And they also have, I'm sure you've already mentioned it, but frightful presence as well. So again, not only with the size, you have this dragon coming towards you, and he uses frightful presence so that if you fail the save, your adventurers are frightened of it and have disadvantage on attacks. So it just, the odds keep stacking and stacking against your party, you just can't. You shouldn't piss off a dragon under any circumstances. That was my takeaway from this.
No, I think that's good advice. Actually,
good advice from me. Great. Is there anything about dragons in general that you don't like, or is there anything that you're like, oh, that's a bit weak in that particular area at all?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about this. Dragons in 5th edition are not as powerful as once they were. I think a lot of the very famous creatures in D&D have been toned down a little bit in 5th edition. The Tarask is one example of a creature which is, I think, challenge rating 30. I think it's the biggest thing in D&D, but it's nowhere near as powerful as it was in, as I said, when I started 3.5. I think Pathfinder sort of stemmed off that, but back in that, dragons were much more fearsome than in 5th edition, and it tends to be because of the breath weapon. The recharge on that means that with a particularly bad set of rolls, a dragon can use a breath weapon and then be stuck for 4 or 5 rounds without having it again, which can be a bit of a problem. And the legendary actions, they're not great. The fact that it can just make a tail attack with one of them, there are better legendary actions out there. There's no ranged attack with a legendary action. They can't like shoot little fireballs. They can't spray the area with poison. There is an argument that, especially once you get below ancient, once you get to sort of adult and young dragons, they're not very powerful for something of their challenge rating. They don't have magic immunity anymore. They don't have damage resistance. They don't have regeneration. There's a lot of things that have sort of popped up with dragons in various editions before. They're very vanilla at the moment. They have an armor class and lots of health, but that's kind of about it. So with enough archers and enough sort of, I would say, for instance, if you take an ancient black dragon, which is challenge rating 21, and you've got 4 level 20 characters that are fighting it, so it'll be a medium to hard encounter for it. They're all rangers or fighters, so they've got probably +5 to hit because they've got +5 dex. They've got +6 on the proficiency to attack with. Maybe they've got +2 weapons. They've got +2 at shooting. That's +15 to hit. This thing's going to get hit on 3/4 of the attacks. The armor class is not that strong. Yeah, there's an argument to say they're not as powerful as once they were.
And for me, like when reading through this, there was a bit. It reminded me a bit when we talked about the Gif Yankee and the Gif Sari. There's a lot on the metallic dragons. Like there seemed to be like this evil nurse here is like XYZ and stuff, and then the good dragons are like, well, here's how they look, a little bit more, and it just felt a lot less. And again, I think it's that sort of like, well, you're going to go fight the dragons, right? Why would you go and have a chat with them? So I feel like for me, it makes sense that you'd want to go fight the evil dragons. And what you were saying before about the good dragons being, well, I feel personally they maybe are a bit overkill because they've got 2 breath weapons and the ability to shapeshift, even though one of the breath weapons is a bit more defensive.
Yeah.
But it did feel like if you go up against a good dragon, it probably would not kill you, but it would be like, well, this was a very bad idea. And I feel it would be very hard, unless, like, I guess it's that sort of thing. It's like, are you running an evil campaign where you actually go and kill a good dragon and stuff like that? It just felt like maybe an imbalance to me in terms of reading about it. A
lot of the good creatures suffer from that treatment as well. I mean, if you have a look at the angels compared to the devil section in Monster Manual, it doesn't get anywhere near as much treatment. Yeah, there is an argument to say that the evil stuff is focused on more. I guess that's natural because you're going to be fighting more evil things, and maybe it's a challenge. Hey, you try and get a good dragon into a campaign is something that you need to kill or fight. I mean, some things that the good dragons they do get mentioned are the fact that they will take sides in battles where they deem the good to be, and maybe that's not necessarily where you deem the good to be. Maybe there's a longer term plan the dragon sees that you don't, or that doesn't matter because the short term is too drastic.
Certainly with like the gem dragons, when they sort of come around, because obviously they're so neutral that they might, whereas the good dragons will be like, well, what you're fighting is probably more evil, but the neutral ones may take a side what maybe interests them. So I thought that would have been quite interesting. The other thing And I think, again, it's just because we've been talking about like the grey areas in between sort of black and white. I felt like all dragons, obviously, as you sort of talked about, are driven by a greed of some sort, whether it's monetary wealth or, as I put down here, like the knowledge of warfare. Quite a few of them are like really into their tactics, which feels a very D&D thing to do, I gotta be honest. But I just felt like it feels very sort of, this is going to sound stupid. It feels very capitalistic, like they're just sat on big piles of gems and stuff. Whereas I feel like you could just say they're driven by something like a collective need. So like because I like, you know me, I collect RPG books. I don't read them. That's my hoard. You know what I mean? Like, I guess there's like the wealth of knowledge, or you could, and I guess that leads on to like how would you implement it? Like I would think about dragons that aren't necessarily the treasure for them. Like one man's treasure is another man's junk, etc. So I guess because of this, again, we've said like these dragons are like the big bad at the end, and you're gonna get all this treasure, and it's all gonna be great. But what if the treasure is literally a ton of books or board games or
and some
whatever?
Of the dragons, some of the dragons do covet things that aren't necessarily treasure. I mean, the good dragons, especially, knowledge and secrets are just as important to it. But even then, I think the green dragon was one that necessarily didn't, it would collect things that weren't always things of value. They were things that were alive or were growing or had been sculpted in that way. So but no, you're right, fleshing these things out is always quite difficult. My other pet haters, I've mentioned this before, brass and bronze. I mean, pick two different. Why is it an alloy to start with, right? That is a man-made thing. That is not an element that is a metal. It is an alloy of two things. You could have just had a steel dragon. I mean, there are all kinds of things. Iron is an element. You could have had nickel, titanium, platinum, all of these precious metals that, I don't know, I feel like brass and bronze is a bit weird.
No, I see what you mean. It did feel a bit nerdy then. You're like, oh, I think you'll find. But actually, an iron dragon or steel dragon, that would be...
Well, again, steel is the same problem because that's an alloy as well. But like copper is an element. I understand that. I can get behind that. But brass... Yeah, brass and bronze both have copper in them. So it's like, come on.
So if you were going to implement dragons into your campaign, or if you have, how would you go about it? How would you put them into your worlds?
Dragons are very powerful and they cause a lot of attention if something appears or is influencing an area that the players are currently in. The main thing that you need to do is to really big up the fear or the myth around the dragon. So as an example, the campaign we run at the moment, the party were on an island where it was pretty much a destroyed sort of wreck, effectively. It was abandoned, long abandoned, and there was a mine in it. And pretty much the first thing you found out about the island was there's a reason why no one's here, and there's a reason why the mine is abandoned, is because there's a dragon and it destroyed everything. It took up residence there, and it's just there now. As long as we don't wake it up, it's fine. To date, you haven't met the dragon. At no point have you ever encountered it, but there is enough fear there that it's been mentioned a good 15, 20 times subsequently.
I'm ready to go back, but we're a little bit busy just now.
But that's kind of half the point. Is like you want to build up the myth of the thing before you throw yourselves at it. You don't just say like a dragon attacks and now it's dead. That feels like a waste of something with a lot of intelligence. And intelligent enemies need a bit more planning and they need a bit more thought to them. Have a dragon taunt party. Have it follow them or tail them or try and bargain with them or threaten them and then run. Dragons all have minions. They all have servants. They all have traps in their lairs. Play around with that sort of stuff. It's good fun.
It's interesting what you said about sort of like a dragon attack. So the very first 5th edition adventure module, the Horde of the Dragon Queen, starts off with a dragon attack. And your characters sort of just appear and then you have to help out the village and stuff. And both Horde of the Dragon Queen and the Rise of Tiamat, which is like the two modules, as it were, introducing dragons. That's interesting because it talks about bringing back Tiamat, and you don't to my knowledge, again, I have to say I've not read all of it. The idea that you have the cults that wanted to bring Tiamat back, etc. So you don't necessarily fight a dragon till right at the end of Horde of Dragon Queen, and even then, I think it is a young adult or not a wormling. That's a teenager, basically.
A weaker one. What level is that campaign? Do you know?
So the first one, the Horde of Dragon Queen, is 1 to 5. And then,
okay, yeah, so it's going to be a young dragon.
yeah. And then the Rise of Tiamat, the second part, is like 6 to 20, essentially. But the interesting bit in the Rise of Tiamat, so obviously the first one focuses quite heavily on the chromatic dragons. Rise of Tiamat, you sort of thwarted the cult for now, and then you go, the party should go to a place called Waterdeep, which is obviously quite famous in the Forgotten Realms as a place, almost like I don't think it is the capital. I think it's Neverwinter, but that doesn't matter for this. You go there. There's a council of I'm gonna get this wrong. It's like the masked lords of Waterdeep. Ooh, sorry, pluck that out of the air. Then
I can see it.
And the it's quite cool because obviously then you're in this big council chamber, but every lord has a mask, so you can't tell who they are. So in case someone gets assassinated, you don't know who that was, or they don't get bribed as easily, etc. So it's all very secret. And throughout that campaign, the Rise of Tiamat, you have 4 council sessions after every couple of missions and stuff to see how well it's going. But then in sort of the council session 2, you hear from the metallic dragons who say, hey, we would like to help. And so then they send representatives. And I quite like that, a bit more political thing where, like we were saying before, like if the metallic dragons could shapeshift and be a more less scary form for the party and maybe be an ally in some way, that I thought was really cool. The idea I had from that, so when I was reading about that, is having an NPC or a minor character who was a dragon and just never really mentions it, just is along for the ride, but becomes endearing. And then obviously they're like, oh no, Derek, wait, Derek's not dead. and it's some massive like gold dragon. It's like, oh shit,
yeah,
Derek's a dragon. So I thought that'd be quite cool. And then the other thing I thought of, because it doesn't really speak about this per se, but obviously dragons come together and mate, and they'll have eggs, and that's where dragon eggs come from, and that's where that's where dragons come from. Hooray! But I like the idea that somehow, like these eggs must be huge as well, or they must be sizable. But again, like I can imagine, like on a party, like if they're going through a dungeon, they just happened upon an egg or a lone egg in a like a broken hatchery, just one, and they take it with them, and it hatches. And then the dragons just, what do you do? Because this is going to get bigger. It feels very much like, Hagrid and his dragons, that sort of so I thought that would be quite a fun little thing. It's like, okay, you've got a problem now. And it's going to become a very big problem if you're not sure, especially if it's a chromatic dragon as well. And they're just going to be inherently evil. So
yeah, it's very true. Dragons are, they're really clever. They're intelligent. They like to get involved, especially metallic dragons. But even chromatic dragons, they like to have a mission, a vengeance, a purpose. They like to get involved and really just exert their superiority over the situation. Put it that way. I like them. Dragons will always have a place in a campaign for me. They're always really, really good fun. And there is always that brilliant reveal, isn't there, where you're walking around with some beggar and you've been treating him badly and he's been following you around, and eventually it turns out he's a large gold dragon and sort of looking down on you, and you think, oh, okay.
Oh, shit. Derek, no. So, sort of to tail us off then, so do you have any recommendations for similar sort of inspirations that happen to have dragons in, or maybe lore, or just a general sort of like, where else could we find out about dragons? Rather than Googling.
Dragons are really interesting everywhere because, I mean, dragons have always been associated with like fairy tales and, all your kind of horror stories as you've been growing up, and they can be anything from super intelligent to super animalistic. If you want a really famous example of dragons, which are essentially just wild animals that are particularly special, then there's a lot in Harry Potter that's quite a good example of them. Maybe some white dragon behavior could be compared to like a Hungarian horntail and how they approach things. For me, the best and most fun I've seen with dragons in books is Robin Hobbs books. She's got about 5 or 6 trilogies now, I think, all in the same world, and a few of them specifically deal with dragons. And not to get sort of, spoil anything, if you haven't read them, Rob and Hob, they are really, really, really good. I think Ship of Magic is maybe the first one, or the Assassins.
Oh, I think it's the Assassin's
Apprentice, I think, is maybe the first one.
I think so.
But in that book, dragons, they almost have a sense of like old magic to them, and they're much more serpentine, poisonous, rather than fire-breathing. And they are intelligent and almost have this sort of magical mind-reading force that sort of goes with them. It's very, very cool. It's almost a bit eldritch in the way that they work. Yeah, I'd recommend that. That's if you want an example of intelligent dragons, that's a good way to go.
So my examples of maybe not intelligent dragons, but quite fun dragons. There's a film. Well, I'm sorry, there is a story which has been made into a very famous film called The Never Ending Story, and in it there is a creature called a luck dragon called Falcor, who's incredible. Like, there's a whole, that if you've ever seen a sort of like a small child on the back of a dragon going, yeah, putting their hand in the air, that's from Never Ending Story. And he has some great sort of like, again, like wise word quotes. Never give up and good luck will always find you. I was like, oh, yes, that's the 80s nostalgia I long for. It is super. Again, it's an ally that can help you in certain situations. A bit like the Eagles from Lord of the Rings. Like, I can get you somewhere. Don't worry, Bastion. And just
but we can't fly you over plot points.
You have to face the challenges yourself. But well, Never Ending Story is a great film anyway. I highly, highly recommend it.
Brilliant.
The other one I'll quickly say is Spirited Away. If you've ever seen that from Studio Ghibli,
very true.
There is a dragon in that called Haku. I think that's the English dubbed version of that. But again, it has the animalistic side to it, but obviously is inspired by Asian influences as well.
That's a cool film. I like that film.
It's a great film. Oh, I watched it again recently because it came back on Netflix. So I was like,
of course it did. Yeah. Yeah, very good point. So I feel like I've told you as much about dragons as you're going to absorb in about 45 minutes. What are you going to treat me to next time?
So I might have thought of the episode title before thinking this all the way through, Ryan.
Oh, this is brilliant. I look forward to this.
So you were saying to me like, oh, I'm sorry I picked the Monster Manual, and I was like, oh, just you wait, because now I'm going to show you. We're now going to be playing with Turtles. So it is the Turtle package, which is the Tomb of Annihilation supplement, which introduces the Turtle race at their island and a little mini adventure in the back. And
lovely.
It's going to be great. You're going to absolutely love it.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Turtles. Oh, yeah. I haven't been able to get Turtles into my head yet, so that's brilliant.
Excellent. So guess who forgot to talk about social plugs, etc.? Whoops. All right, well, we'll do it now. You can find Ryan on YouTube on his channel, that's Ursa Ryan, where he does all sorts of amazing cool stuff with Civ, especially Civilization 6 with the new season pass, I think it is. He's also got a Discord and a Patreon, so go check out his stuff there. Me, I run What Am I Rolling, a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. We release episodes every 2 weeks on a Sunday. And yeah, that's going well. So you can find it on the What Am I Rolling website. That's www.wairpodcast.com. And you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at WAIR_podcast. Both me and Ryan are in TBA Mondays, which is a D&D homebrewed YouTube series that comes out on YouTube at points. We're struggling a bit at the moment due to internet stuff, but it is really good and we highly recommend you watch it. So that is TBA Mondays on YouTube, and on Twitter, if you want to follow that, that's at D&DTBA. Great, thanks. Well, we're done, I think.
I think so. Hey, I hope you learned something. I enjoy dragons. Dragons are good fun.
Yeah. No, it was nice. It's nice to actually learn a lot more and the difference between them. I think I say that every time. It's like, I've learned there's 2 different types or 3, and now I know the difference.
Yeah.
So I quite like
and there's that moment where you realise that a member of the good aligned party that you've been journeying with for 75 episodes is actually a blue dragonborn, and you think about it and go, hang on a sec.
Oh, no.
Can I just say he also didn't realise that blue were evil at that point?
Really?
So,
oh,
yeah.
no. Well, with that bombshell, I think we'll say goodbye for now.
Indeed. See you later, everyone.
Bye. I can't believe you didn't know that. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true.
Oh, Samuel.